As a scientist, I'm really fascinated by the narratives that I grew up with, that I inherited in my discipline to understand these animals. And to boil them down into a sort of comic book level, these narratives describe a world that was created from millions of years of coevolution in a sort of perfect harmony. And that humans, of course, are not part of that. We fell from Eden, so we're definitely not part of that. And so everything we touch has that human stain. And must be eradicated. There's a lot of problems with this narrative, and we could talk about that for a long time, but I really want to talk about what happens when we start to let it go, because if you live in that narrative, suddenly it self-enforces itself. All you will see when you go to a place with feral horses or feral donkeys are the trails and the dust, and you won't see the amazing things that are happening if you just look a little harder. So some of the first research that got me into this was seeing wells that wild donkeys were digging to groundwater in the hyper-arid deserts of the Southwest, and seeing that all the species of these systems use those features. These features provide the only surface water present, and are really quite a remarkable thing, especially because it was never published in the scientific literature. But of course, this was known for generations by lay people and by indigenous groups. I was working in Central Australia with wild donkeys there, and an Aboriginal woman gave me a painting, and she did not know what I studied. It was a painting of a wild donkey digging a well to groundwater. And what's really remarkable about this painting is that it wasn't just digging a well, but it was painted in the style of the dreaming beings, the beings that dreamt the world into existence, suggesting that wild donkeys for Australian Aboriginals are like all the other wildlife that co-created the world along with human beings. If we let go of this narrative further, this idea of naturalness, of belonging, of purity, we start to see lots of things we were told just aren't true. That mountain lions are perfect predators of wild horses and wild burros, that they're capable of regulating their populations, which is some of the work I showed, and change their behavior. This is something, of course, the BLM and National Park Service and many scientists deny or ignore. We also start to see other things, remarkable things. We see that wild burros grieve for their dead. This is some weird research I'm doing because it's kind of a weird thing. They shit on their dead. But what's amazing about it is that the dung is full of seeds, and they come back to these sites year after year. You'll find an old donkey bone skull from who knows how long ago, withered in the sun, and it's covered in fresh poop. And these seeds germinate and create these nurseries, these gardens in the desert, which is really remarkable that something like grieving can actually weave itself into how the world works. And so when we drop this narrative, this idea of naturalness and purity, we start to see all sorts of emergent properties that pertain to not just wild donkeys and horses, but to the whole world. We realize that animal culture and cognition may be way more important than these notions that are largely unmeasurable of millions of years of coevolution of static beings. We start to see things that we thought were invasive pests, and we realize that they're actually maybe the only things that can survive in these landscapes we've changed so much. We realize that the eucalyptus trees, the feral eucalypts that everyone hates, are actually full of insects and birds. We realize that our campaigns of killing to preserve some kind of historic past may actually be a huge distraction. Now, I did want to remember something here, but I think now I have to find it. We realize that the moral choice for us humans is not to wind back the clock to any particular time, but to find right and respectful relationships with the non-human other, with the nations of life that surround us. We realize that everything is feral, that humans have touched everything. We've always been part of this planet. The Amazon rainforest itself was co-created, you could say, by ancient civilizations and cared for by modern people. We see that humans are not the only agents with will, not the only subjects that have their own wishes, that the animals and the plants are also self-willed and striving to be wild, that instead of purity being our goal, respecting the rights of other species to be self-willed, to be self-wild might instead be. And I don't think there's any better species to be the flagship of this vision of the feral earth than feral horses and feral donkeys.